Thank you so much for stopping by for the first episode of the Shenandoah Show. I am so excited to be here with you guys. My main goal here is to inspire anyone listening, no matter where you are in life or what you're going through. If you're at rock bottom, I'm here to remind you the only place to go is straight up or sideways. And if you're at a great place right now, awesome. I'm here to remind you keep dreaming because you're probably not even dreaming big enough. So let's go big or go home. One of the questions a lot of people ask me is that your real name? And I always say it absolutely is, but I rarely tell them why. I used to be deeply embarrassed, but now, honestly, it sounds like an origin story to some evil superhero, and it's kind of cool. So it's not made up, not entirely. My mom gave it to me to keep me from getting kidnapped by drug dealers, but in polite society, I just smile and say, oh, yeah, Mom was fun like that. Mom was a lot of things. Fun is not an adjective I'd give her. My mom is a first-generation French immigrant, and she moved here with my grandma in the early 60s. Grandma married an American soldier, and my mom was from a previous marriage. She was fluent in French and German and taught herself English by watching Sesame Street. They lived in Shade O'Plenty Trailer Court in a raggedy single-wide trailer. Grandma started her own business with an Electrolux cleaning for rich people in town where she had the novelty of being a real French maid, and my grandpa worked as a plumber. My mom was 16 when she met my dad. She was sitting on the only bridge that took you to the beach, the Sullivan's Island Connector. It was a 2-lane affair made in the early 20s, and it operated as a drawbridge, so traffic would back up for miles as people sat waiting to go to the beach. And Mom was sitting in the passenger side of her friend's car one summer when my dad was languishing in the opposite lane. They locked eyes, and she said they knew they had to meet. But just then the bridge opened, and she lost sight of him. Traffic moved on, and a chance meeting later that day at the local Piggly Wiggly led to them dating, and they eventually had a courthouse wedding on Halloween Day, and Mom dropped out of school when she found out she was pregnant with me. Dad took a job as a welder on a boat named the Owl and the Pussycat, and they moved into their own trailer next door to her parents. The Owl and the Pussycat was a poem about a cat and an owl that fell in love and set sail off to sea. But in reality, it was the name of a pea green shrimp boat that had caught the attention of Coast Guard, though there was nothing ever really found to be wrong. It was just making a lot of trips across the intercoastal waterway with a bunch of characters that were not known to be savory folks. Normal dinner conversation between my mom and dad over paper plates and hamburger helper on the folding card table in the tiny kitchen was Dad telling Mom how they were transporting drugs. They would weld big metal boxes and they'd stash the drugs, and if the Coast Guard showed up, they'd just toss them overboard and they'd sink. And then they would just share the coordinates with whoever was going to pick them up, and they'd pick them up later. So apparently this wasn't enough for my dad. He wasn't making enough money, and so he went on the search of landlocked gold, and he found it across the street from the trailer park at the Stella Maris Catholic Church. There was a rumor going around that they had gold collection plates, and Dad was going to find out. So he climbed through a window one night and made a run for it with 2 brass plates, but leaving behind his favorite Mountain Dew trucker hat. Dad was out to sea when the detective showed up at the little rented trailer asking questions about a string of recent break-ins and if she had known anything. She opened the door and peeked out, and the officer leaned in, squinting at the refrigerator. "Who's that?" he asked, pointing at a picture of a man in a Mountain Dew hat. "My husband," my mother answered. "Is this about the boat?" "What boat?" The detective motioned for the picture and turned it around in his hand, showing his partner. "The Owl and the Pussycat," my mom answered. "You need to come with us," said the sheriff. So thanks to Mountain Dew and a 16-year-old pregnant girl, an international drug smuggling operation was brought down in a matter of minutes. Dad was arrested, and the Owl and the Pussycat was destroyed. Threats against my mom swirled through the little town, and the further along in pregnancy she got, the more frightened she became. "I got your name off a street sign on the way to the hospital," she told me one day. "I was riding in your grandpa's van and I saw it, and I liked it. What about my last name? It was different than the rest of the family, or anyone, ever. Oh, I just thought it was pretty. I made it up. Pretty misspelled. But it served a purpose. It kept me safe from anyone that might vaguely associate me with my dad or even my own family, in case anybody might want to kidnap me in retaliation. It was a terror I was reminded of constantly as a child. If anyone gets near you, you scream bloody murder, my mom would say, as if when I asked to walk to the other aisle to look at toys in Kmart, your dad could steal you and take you right to Georgia and give you away to his mother. You don't want him to do that, do you? Terrified with wide-eyed eyes, I'd shake my head dutifully. No, I did not want anyone to steal me. I wasn't even allowed to play outside unattended or walk to school alone. Not until we moved to New Hampshire was I allowed a vague flavor of freedom, but still had to look over my shoulder for my new stepfather would sometimes just creepily trail behind me in his Jeep, watching me and my friends walk to school. I was always warned to keep an eye out for anybody that looked like my dad, but the only picture I'd ever seen of him was when he was holding me. I was swaddled in a blanket, and he had a nervous smile and a jail uniform. We were both behind a chain link and barbed wire topped fence, and on the back of the picture in my mother's flourish script was written Aiken Youth Correctional Center. Wait, I said years later, looking at the picture in the family album. If you're on the outside and Dad's on the inside, how'd you get me over there? She didn't look at me. Did you throw me over the fence for a photo op? I never did get the answer, but I'm pretty sure a couple teenagers played football with an infant. I'm still pretty durable at 45. So being from South Carolina, I never much thought about my name other than the random kids at school would point and laugh and go, DOA, dead on arrival. Like I never heard that, I'd spit back and shrug it off because honestly, I looked like an ugly boy well past puberty. And if that was the meanest thing anybody could come up with that day, I was going to have a good day. It wasn't until I came to Virginia to visit some family one summer that I realized my name was attempting to plagiarize an entire national park. I was 28 and I lived this magical little life where I just walked down the road and random strangers would walk up and buy me ice cream and then cry about their life story while I licked a cone and listened. I was carefree and wild, and life unfolded in a series of miracles, one after the other. And that day, as I walked through the tiny town of Scottsville singing Cowboy Take Me Away by the Dixie Chicks, a random woman said, "You need to go across the street. There's an open mic at the Dewdrop Inn, and you need to go." I walked into the small bar, dropped down at a free table, and added my name to the battered composition notebook, added to the list to perform, and a woman organizing the show glanced down at my name and repeated it like it was a sin. Shenandoah, you smart ass. I pulled out my license and I threw it across the table like a blackjack dealer. It's my real name, I said. I think she let me go next because she was really hoping I was going to suck and then leave. I didn't suck, and I made a bunch of new friends, and I felt like South Carolina suddenly felt like last year's coat, and it didn't fit anymore. The next day, preparing to head back south, I noticed a pair of legs sticking out from an old Ford truck. I'd just replaced the transmission in my truck for the second time, and I knew a thing or two about tools, so I didn't hesitate to show off. I kicked the stranger's foot, and I said, "Hey, is that a Pittman arm puller, or are you just happy to see me?" I said, nodding down at the Y-shaped tool that used to pull the steering gear out. He nodded, shrugged, and said, "If I knew you were coming, I would have worn my best grease." He held out his arms. I laid down next to him in the dirt in my good jeans and thrift store boots and helped a complete stranger pull a transmission. I'd end up marrying this stranger 3 months later, and he would systematically destroy my entire personality, brick by brick, and rebuild me into a quivering, insecure child over the next 10 years. So I hope you guys stick around because I've got a ton more stories to tell, including how I managed to rebuild my entire self into the baddie that you're going to get to know in the coming days. So I want to thank you guys for listening, and I really hope to see you on the next episode of The Shenandoah Show.